Okay, item 8 will be presented to us by the Chief Executive and accompanied by the Finance and Debt team. Welcome.
Yes, we're joined at the table by Karuna Daya, Ross Tucker, John Bishop, Nicola Mills to present the quarterly performance report, noting this is to the end of December.
Thank you, Jim, and through you, Mayor Brown. We will take the QPR as read. We have prepared a very short presentation that relates to the update we've just heard from Peter and Jim, stepping through 3 key items: financial information including capital delivery to February, some performance measure trends, and to look at the nature of the impacts of the weather events and our response and recovery efforts. We move to the next slide.
It's not a presentation mode.
Okay.
Uses us some panic button pushing here. We're away.
And so Peter has already covered this slide, but if we flip to the next one, sorry. Can you figure it out? Okay. Apologies for the technical delay, we'll just wait.
Your Worship, just while this is loading, I wondered if I could just make a suggestion that next time we have a quarterly report, that happen before the Chief Executive and financial update, because what we're doing now is going backwards to the 31st of December. So probably, I just think from a process perspective, we could just think of that for next time. That would be helpful, I think. Thanks.
Good suggestion. Back to the future, and here we are. We're going back to the analogue period, and we'll print these off and hand them round if we can't.
You're just going to have to tell us to do the slides.
Sorry, so if we just flip to the previous slide, sorry, Sandra, just go back 2 slides, yeah, and one more time. So what we can see there's a few images up there, just a few of the many impacts on our parks and facilities, included the flooded playgrounds and the domain, and of course the many household items that were also damaged. And if you go to the next slide, please. And one more, yeah, thank you. So just a few of the many impacts. And next we have some of the emergency response and recovery efforts. On January 27, when the floods hit, our catering team received some late night calls for help. And by 2 a.m, the Kelson Civil Defence Centre received their first delivery of food from Auckland Council. And up there you can see the Mangere Civil Defence Centre and helping our isolated communities with loading essentials via helicopter. Also up there you can see the Community Recycling Centre, usually a drop-off point for unwanted items for reuse or repurpose, but in this instance also a valuable resource of household items for flood-affected residents. We also worked in partnership with many agencies and across the council group as well. So that just gives you an idea of some of the response. And on that, I'll hand over to Ross to cover the group financials.
Okay, thank you, Karuna. If we can go to the next slide. So these bubbles show the direct revenue and expenditure. The ones on the right are the year-to-date for the quarter. So this is going back in time, looking for the 6 months through to the end of December. And the numbers on the left is the updated picture that Peter talked about, the year-to-date results for February. You can see the 1.7 billion of direct revenue. Sort of winding it back, that was 1.3 billion in December against direct expenditure of 1.7 billion. So maybe just to explain what we mean by those terms. These are kind of the controllable costs. These are things that direct revenue excludes things like rates revenue. The direct expenditure, these are things that we can manage through contracts and payments to staff. It excludes things like interest and depreciation. So it's only a portion of the overall revenue and expenditure, but these are the ones that where staff have more control, and so these are the ones we focus on in a performance sense. The question around, well, why does that kind of show we're making a sort of a loss of 400 million? I guess the answer to that is because this is the cost of running public services. We're not in the business of making money. Some of the services like regulatory and water care are largely cost neutral, but other ones like running parks, for example, they cost money. So you wouldn't expect this to make money. In a performance sense, what we're really interested in is, given the budget we set, are we ahead or behind on that budget? So these show us that on revenue, we were 2% ahead of the revenue budget as of December, and we were almost 1% below budget on expenditure. So we're in a good position there. Looking forward to the February results, revenue wasn't quite as good. We're only running 1% ahead of budget across the group, but on the expenditure side, that was now grown to 1% under budget. So that is kind of that's largely the period before the storm and cyclone events. As you heard before, the outlook going forward is not looking very favourable, but it's kind of good to know that we're performing well against budget going into those events. So in terms of what's driving it, Peter's kind of explained a number of those things. I won't go through the numbers driving it, but essentially some of the favourable things, and there are lots of pluses and minuses on the revenue side. Some of the big pluses are port activity through the ports and more people consuming more water. The budgets were set coming off the back of drought and water restrictions. We've kind of gone from one extreme to the other, so water consumption isn't being reduced as it had been previously. On the adverse side, parking fee revenue, infringement revenue, public transport revenue, all of those things is the biggest negative. And the water infrastructure charges, that's connections that people pay as new buildings are completed and people connect to the water network, that's down, reflecting lower development activity. So some big pluses and minuses, and those trends have kind of continued. On the spend side, why are we below budget? The biggest movements are employment benefits, about 10 million under budget as of February, and that's largely due to delays with filling roles. Some of that is also the tough labour market, trying to find people and recruit people in roles such as IT. Very challenging market. And in terms of repairs and maintenance, a lot of property building repairs and maintenance has been delayed. Getting raw materials, getting work done. It's pretty tough market at the moment, so things have been delayed. So that's a picture of direct revenue and expenditure. Going to the next slide, please. Looking at capital investment. So the results to February, 1.6 billion CapEx delivered across the group. So that is that was 8% below budget. So we delivered 92%. Updated to at December it was 1.2 billion delivered, and we're running at 90% of budget delivered. That's improved slightly to 92% with a 1.6 billion delivered to February. So we are delivering more CapEx up until that period. The outlook going forward, obviously with the storm and cyclone, there's going to be weather-related delays, and we'll see some investments delayed, slowed down. We're also looking to pause some discretionary projects, but at the same time we'll have urgent capital renewals. So just how those two things play out over the next few months, we'll have to wait and see around the timing of those things. What 92% of CapEx delivered is not a bad result from a delivery perspective. Within that, Auckland Transport and Water Care are a couple of the big areas where delivery has been pretty strong. If we go to the next slide, please. So this shows us a couple of examples from Auckland Transport, but some of the big things, Eastern Busway, new electric trains, and other projects such as the Matakana Link Road, which is shown there, have been going ahead. So Auckland Transport currently delivering 90% of budget through to the end of the year to date, through to the end of February. So pretty strong delivery on a bunch of transport things that we'd planned to do. going to the next slide, please. The other one is water care, and as Peter's mentioned, Central Interceptor is going very well, operating on budget and on time. And a major milestone completed with the tunnel boring machine crossing the harbour there.
Did you say on budget?
That's my understanding. Central Interceptor on budget and on time. So the project is performing really well and pretty tough operating environments. So Central Interceptor is one part of it, but then there's a range of other projects that Watercare has been busy delivering. So Watercare actually running slightly ahead. They've been spending a bit more than 100% of their capital project budget within this time period. So that is not because they're overspending, but they're just kind of running ahead of time. They're delivering slightly more than was forecast when we set the budget. If we go to the next slide, a couple of other projects. So you've got the next Oahu treatment plant there. So this is a modular approach. This is the fourth water treatment plant to serve Oahu. So they've added, rather than big lumps of infrastructure, added small modules to bring on water supply as and when it's needed to service demand. And then we've got the Hibiscus Coast pump station, which opened in February on East Coast Space Road. So that will double the amount of water that's pumped to the Hibiscus Coast area on a daily basis, from 17 million litres a day to 34 million litres today. So a really important project to support the growth that has happened and is continuing to happen in that part of Auckland. So yeah, strong CapEx delivery from both Auckland Transport and Watercare. So I'll pass across now to John to talk about the debt update.
Thanks, Ross. The next slide, please. I know there's one more to go.
Oh, well, there's one more, just some other CapEx across the group. That's Hammond Park Playground and the athletics track at Mount Smart Stadium. So other parts of the group not as strong, but a couple of key projects have been completed. And there's obviously more details in the reporting pack on the agenda. Back to you, John.
Thanks, Ross. So moving on to the debt picture at the end of December 2022. So focusing on that top chart there, net debt of around 11.4 billion at the end of December. As Peter outlined, that's increased marginally to 11.5 billion at the end of February, but well within our debt planned for the year end of 12 billion. That increase in debt over the 6-month period to December was made up of a number of issuances, green bonds issued in the Swiss market, some funding through the local government funding agency, and some shorter term commercial paper. On a debt to revenue basis, if we focus on the bottom chart there, at the end of December, 248%. So again, well within the planned year-end outturn of 253% and comfortably within our internal limit of 290%. As far as the recent flood issues are concerned and cyclone, we have discussed those with both credit rating agencies. They remain obviously comfortable with our financial position, although they obviously do note the increased uncertainty that does arise because of those, and the increased pressure it does put on our operating budget. Just by way of note, if you'd like more breakdown of our funding sources, that is in your pack on page 6 of the group quarterly performance report. But on that, I'll pass over to Nicola.
Thanks, John. Next slide, please. So turning to Auckland Council's operating performance, it is favourable for the year so far, so both to December, which is shown on the right, in the right bubbles, and February in the bubbles in the middle. Revenue is on budget. Some areas are doing better than others, lots of ups and downs, but an example is our pools and leisure visitation and memberships, which has recovered better than we had expected. On the flip side, we have volumes for LIMS and property file requests, which are lower than budgeted as a result of the slower property market. Our expenditure is tracking 5% below budget to the end of February. And as Jim mentioned earlier, the savings target for the year, we have achieved 85% of that target at the end of February, and we are continuing to make quite significant progress throughout March. Next slide, please. Turning to our capital delivery, it is just under 80% of budget. This is substantially better than where we were at in the prior year when we had significant COVID disruptions. Some of the projects that we have completed. Next slide, please. So we have the city centre upgrade between Merrill Drive and Shortland Street, which Peter mentioned, but here's some pictures. You're possibly familiar with it. Another project is the stormwater project in Northcote, which was the daylighting of the Awataha stream and quite a significant project to manage stormwater in that area. And finally, in Greylin, significant progress on the Stanmore Road stormwater upgrade there as well. I will hand over to Karuna to talk to the non-financial performance.
Thank you, Nicola. So of the 24 measures that were updated in Q2, the 13 we met relate mainly to stormwater and some regulatory services and customer satisfaction and consenting. As you can see up there, the domestic curbside refuse per capita dropped in Q4 as lockdown restrictions were lifted and have continued to drop. Just a note on the waste, there have been some missed collections for some time due to staff shortages experienced by our contractors. So while curbside volumes are dropping, customer satisfaction has also gone down because of this. We are working with our contractors and communicating this with customers. Also, with the 11 we did not meet, they relate to our utilisation and visitor numbers for our community facilities and venues, and also consenting timeframes. And as you can see up there, there is an omission. The graph key has been missed out, but the green line is the building consents and the darker one is the resource consents. So we did see an improvement of consenting timelines in Q2. It was lower than the same time the previous year due to the high backlog of work in progress applications, along with the loss of experienced staff and unfilled vacancies. However, the latest results do suggest that we are seeing some performance improvement and the work in progress is also dropping. So that concludes this quarterly performance report presentation, and we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent presentation, Councillor Henderson, who's so impressed he's withdrawn his question. Okay, we have a mover and a seconder to receive this or not? I'm sorry, Councillor Ferry, I missed your hand. My apologies.
It's okay, I was quite slow putting it up. So I did have a question around, sorry, let me just find my notes. On page 42, I'm just checking I'm on the right item, yes. On page 42, it mentions a really low percentage of high-risk alcohol visits at only 41%. Acknowledging might not be one of you at the table here who can answer that. That's really concerning. So I wondered if there's any, there didn't seem to be any commentary in the report that explained that. So is there anything you can add, or do you need to take that away? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. So we do have Craig on the line, but I can, sorry, he's here in person. In terms of the alcohol visits, during lockdown and restrictions, it was hard to get to visit some of the premises. Craig, you may want to touch a little bit on that.
But aren't we talking about the time period that's after lockdown's finished?
My apologies, and I did, sorry, Councillor, could you just repeat your major concern?
Yes, sorry. So on page 42, it says we only did 41% of visits to the high-risk alcohol sites.
Yep. Yeah, excuse me. So as Corinne has alluded to, pretty much because of the issues we had with lockdowns and the like, we've been a long way behind in terms of managing our, getting on top of those high-risk call-outs. We are picking up significantly in that area, but it was predominantly as a result of not being able to access venues.
Okay, so it's a hangover from when we were
Correct.
in lockdowns as opposed to, because we haven't been in lockdowns for a while.
Correct, yeah.
Do you have any idea of when we might catch up?
We will never get to 100%, and I don't have a number with you, but I can come back to you on a time frame forecast as to when we'll get back to a significant level.
Okay, I do note that the target is 100%, so maybe we need to look at that target if that's not realistic, but I'll leave that there. Thank you.
So, Councillor Foley, please.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, team, for the presentation. I just wanted to start by saying thank you again to all of our council staff and whānau who supported our communities during the flood and the cyclone event, and it was great to see those pictures up there and reminding us too of some of the extraordinary efforts that our council whānau put in, like our catering staff and our ordinary staff from our libraries and pools who put on their high-vis vests and suddenly became civil defence staff with very little training. So I commend our staff and I commend our council organisation for that effort. My question relating to the report is, near the front of the report, you mentioned that there was $10 million, we were $10 million under budget in terms of those employment benefits, and you mentioned delays in filling some of those roles, you know, because of the shortage in the market and things like that. I just wondered whether the cost to staff well-being, the cost to, you know, us not being able to deliver some of those projects as a result of that shortage, is that being captured somewhere or somehow? Kia ora.
Hi, good morning, Councillor. I might take that question. There's not a direct correlation between the benefit that we're receiving in the underspend on staffing costs. That, as I say, that's primarily a function of driving efficiency and constraining recruiting for vacancies. Where we can hold vacancies for longer, we are. We're using those opportunities to redeploy people that are otherwise, whose jobs otherwise wouldn't be continuing. So that's kind of the machinery around managing the staffing profile. There isn't a direct correlation between that and project delivery. Project delivery is impacted by a number of other factors, and it wouldn't be appropriate to say there's a direct reconciliation between one and the other.
Kia ora. Thank you. I'm just bringing that concern up because I have heard from, you know, when I'm out in the field talking to people, that because some roles haven't been filled, they're expected to take on that burden. So where they might have been working with 2 local board areas, for example, they're now expected to work with 4 local board areas. So I'm just wondering what that impact is on them as staff, on us as council, and on our local boards, for example, on delivering those initiatives and priorities and projects. So I wasn't really meaning the bigger projects, but perhaps more those localized projects. But I appreciate that that may be difficult to capture in the data, but just wondered if that was even being looked at all. Kia ora. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you for that. Okay, do we have a move and a second to Fifi, the Auckland Group Council's quarterlies? Yes, we've got Williamson. In favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you very much for that presentation. It's now 10 to 11 and I think it's time for us to have a 10-minute morning tea break, if that's okay. So we will resume at 11 o'clock in about 10 minutes. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.